everybody. My name is Jessica, and I'm an educator at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in downtown Dallas. In just a minute, you're going to meet my friend Kristen, who's going to be talking with us today about some really cool animal adaptations. Now, she's going to be asking all of us watching a lot of questions, like what do we observe about an animal? What do we think that animal might eat? Maybe even how that animal behaves. So we want everyone to participate and answer her questions. If you or your teacher has access to the YouTube chat, we would love to see your answers there. But if not, that's okay. You can answer to yourself. If you have a science journal, you can write it down there. If there's someone else in the room watching with you, you guys can discuss together. But definitely pay attention to her questions and come up with your answers. And again, if you can put it in the chat, we would love to see. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. And Miss Jessica is definitely right. We are talking about animals and their adaptations. These structural adaptations and behavioral adaptations help animals to survive in their habitats. So my first question to you is, what does an animal need to survive? You might have said food, water, shelter, air to breathe, ways to protect themselves, and all of those are great answers, and those are all able to be found in an animal's habitat. But the physical characteristics about their body and behaviors or actions that they do are the adaptations that actually help them to survive and create all of those things or find all of those things within their habitats. So I think I'm going to start with Miss Jessica's favorite today, because I think I did her favorite last yesterday. So let me get this set up. Here is our great horned owl. And what I'm going to ask you to do for just a moment is make some observations. So what do you see or notice about our owl? And I'll give you a moment. So as Miss Jessica said, you can write it in your science journals or tell your teacher or talk about it if someone's in the room. Where do you think an owl lives or eats? How do you think they catch their prey if they're eating other animals? You might have noticed the large eyes or these little tufts of feathers. You might think they're ears. You might have noticed the feathers all over the body or these sharp talons and claws. And we'll talk about those and how those all help the animal to survive. So an owl is going to hang out in the trees. They're going to perch themselves kind of like my taxidermy here up on a branch, and they're going to use their ears to listen and use their eyes to see their environment. And they are carnivores, which means they're going to eat meat. They're going to eat things like little mice, and chipmunks, maybe little rabbits, things like that, even frogs or amphibians too. And they're going to use those big eyes in order to see. And their ears, they've adapted ears too. So they have asymmetrical ears, which means one ear is higher than the other. And this creates almost like surround sound. So one ear can hear to the side and more above, and one ear can hear to the side and down below. And that really helps them to hunt those prey, the chipmunks and the little rabbits and squirrels on the forest floor. Whenever they're scurrying through the leaves, they can hear it really well and kind of pinpoint where that sound is coming from. And that helps them to hunt because what they do is they sit up in these branches and they listen and they look and they wait. They wait for their prey. And once they pinpoint the location, they will swoop down very quickly, pick up the prey, grab it with these sharp talons, and bring it back up into the trees where they feel safe. And that's when they'll eat. So let's look at a different view. Let's look at their skull. So if we look at their skull, I told you their eyeballs are really large. So if we look at the entire skull, their eyeballs are actually a pretty good portion. And then the other thing I noticed is the curved beak now that I'm looking at their skull. That curved beak is going to help him tear the meat and the fur off of the bones of these animals. And sometimes they'll get little tiny bones in there too. And owls will actually spit up the stuff that they cannot digest. So the bones and fur, the things that would be really heavy and hard for them to digest, they're actually going to spit it up in an owl pellet. So there's curved beak. So that adaptation helps them to tear their meat off the bones. We also talked about their feet. I don't know if anyone noticed this. I noticed the sharp claws and the talons of the owl, but we may not have been able to notice that they actually have 3 digits that go forward on their foot and 1 digit that goes backwards. And this is going to be really helpful, one, for grabbing their prey. Remember, I told you they swoop down and they kind of grab their prey with their talons and fly back up to the branches where they feel safe. And these talons are going to help grab that prey. But it's also great for holding onto the branches. So think about if you had to hold onto a branch, 3 facing forward and 1 facing back is really going to help you out to hold onto those round branches. We can go back to our owl now. You also may have noticed one way an owl can protect itself is through camouflage. So I mentioned the feathers, and they're great for flight, but also the color pattern of them is really great for camouflaging. Now, why would an owl need to camouflage itself to protect itself? It can fly away, but I don't know. Do you think there's a reason for that? I think it might be when they're sleeping. So owls are nocturnal, and that means that they are awake at night and asleep during the day. When they're sleeping during the day, there's other animals that are awake. So they need to be able to protect themselves while they're sleeping. And this camouflage will help them blend into the trees. And same with these little tufts of fur. This is a great horned owl, and this is partly where the name comes from, but it's not actually their ears. It's actually part of their camouflage, hoping that it might look like twigs or sticks at quick glance. So they try to camouflage with the trees to protect themselves while they're sleeping. Now, I didn't notice this on my taxidermy specimen here because it's not alive, it's not moving at all. But one thing you might think you know about owls is that they can move their heads all the way around. And it's not quite true. They can move their heads around pretty far, but it's not a full circle. They can actually only see they can move their head about 270 degrees. So if this is our owl facing forward right here with a forward facing head, they can actually cover all this purple ground here, 270 degrees around. So not quite a full circle. They are missing a little bit at the back. So 270 degrees. And they actually have extra bones inside their necks that allow them to do that. So humans, we have 7 bones within our neck. Owls have up to 14 bones within their necks and a few extra blood vessels to help to making sure that the blood doesn't get cut off of their head whenever they're turning really far. So they have some adaptations there. I did mention that flight. They could fly away if they needed to protect themselves. And birds have a couple of adaptations for that. They have hollow bones inside their body, so they're still structurally sound. They're just a little bit lighter. And they have these feathers that will also help them to fly. You may have also noticed the size of this owl. It looks pretty large for an owl, which is really cool. But its weight, the average weight in the wild is only about 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. So that's really great whenever they're needing to fly away. Now, those are all physical or structural adaptations of our owl. And if there was something you noticed or wonder about the owl or a question that you still have, you're more than welcome to put it in the chat. We're going to hold all of our questions until the end. So if I need to come back to the owl, I will. Ms. Jessica, did I hit all of your favorite facts?
Yes, I think so. And like Ms. Kristen said, if you have questions as we go, do feel free to send them to your teacher or drop it in the chat. I'm going to be collecting them so that we can get to some later at the end. So I will be looking for them.
Okay, so that was our great horned owl. That was Miss Jessica's favorite. Now I want to do my favorite. My favorite is frog. So let's see, and I put a toad here next to him. So we have a frog right here and a toad. This is a bullfrog, an American bullfrog. And I believe this is a Great Plains toad or a Woods House's toad. So again, let's make some observations. What do you know about frogs? Where do they live? What do they eat? How do they protect themselves? Okay, about our frogs, you may have noticed the color of the frog. You may have noticed the long legs at the back. You may have even noticed the feet if you got a good view of them. How they're webbed. The toad, you may have noticed, is much smaller than the frog. They still have webbed feet. Their legs are a little bit shorter though, so you can make a few comparisons there. Now, one thing you may know about frogs is that they have that long, sticky tongue that helps catch insects. And if frogs are eating insects, that means that they are a carnivore. They're meat eaters because insects are other animals. Now, they have a second adaptation that I like to talk about for eating their food. And you may not know this one. So yes, they have that long, sticky tongue that helps catch the insect and bring it back into their mouth. But frogs also use their eyes to help them eat. And what happens is they will close their eyelids and push or drop their eyeballs into their mouths, into their bodies, and that will help push the insect down their throats. So they use their eyes and push them into their body, and it pushes that food down their throats, which I think is super cool. Kind of gross, but really cool. And you just have to watch some videos for that one because I don't have a live frog with me today. Frogs have nostrils on their noses, right up here. 2 little nostrils, so they breathe air. But they also exchange oxygen and other nutrients through their skin, through the water. And that's why most of the time you'll see frogs really close to water, if not in water. And that's because they need the water in order to survive and to keep that body moist. So they exchange oxygen through that. One of the questions I've gotten before is, do frogs hibernate? Yes, they do. And do they kind of bury themselves in the mud like turtles do? And that is not true. They usually hibernate within water sources. So like the bullfrog will hibernate in the water, not necessarily covered in mud, because if they cover themselves in mud, they can't exchange oxygen through their skin. So it cuts off that organ that they need. Another thing you might have known about frogs is that they can jump really far. And the adaptation that helps them do that are these long, strong, powerful legs that they have. And that really helps them to jump, sometimes feet away from predators. So it's a way that they can protect themselves and move away from perceived threats. If we look at the skeleton of a bullfrog, here's that of a bullfrog, we can see the hip and the legs and how long they are. Bullfrogs can get up to about 18 inches in length. So that includes the head all the way down the body and the length of the legs. They can be pretty big and they can weigh up to 1 pound. If we look at the toad their legs are actually much, much smaller than a bullfrog's. Another way that frogs can protect themselves is through camouflage. So again, these frogs are blending in with their environment. We can look at the coloration of it. He might blend in with some mud or some dirt at the bottom of the forest floor or near the edge of the lakes or streams. And same with the toad. They're going to camouflage in their environment. But since they cannot jump away quite as successfully as a frog can, they have another way of protecting themselves, and that is to secrete poison out of these glands right behind the eyes. There's like a little circle right there, right behind the eye. And those glands will secrete a poison. Now, if your dog picks up a toad, what's going to happen is a toad might secrete that poison, but your dog will just start foaming at the mouth. The hope is that this poison will taste extremely bitter and bad, and that the dog or the other animal will just drop the toad, and the toad will hopefully survive. And they can just, run away or crawl away after that. They also actually urinate whenever they're scared as well. So they might secrete poison from those glands, but they also might pee if an animal or like a dog or a wolf or something picks them up, hoping that their urine just tastes really bad. And again, the animal will drop it, which I think is kind of funny. Okay, I think I covered everything on the frog. But again, if you have questions, put them in the chat. If you had things that you noticed that I didn't talk about and you want to talk about them later, drop them in the chat, and we'll come back to our frog and our toad. All right, the next animal I'm going to bring out is a possum. Okay, so again, I have the same question for you. How does a possum survive? How are they getting food and water and protecting themselves? What do you think their structural adaptations help them? Or how do you think those structural adaptations help them? Okay, so I know I said frogs were my favorite, but I think possums are a really close second favorite for me. They're just so cute. I just love them so much. Some of the things you may have noticed are the whiskers on the face or the little nose and the small eye. You may have noticed the color of the fur or the fact that it's furry. You may have noticed the shape of the hands or the little claws that are on them. And you may have even noticed the tail that wraps around back here. Possums are actually the only marsupial in North America. And what that means is whenever they give birth, their babies are alive, but they're only about the size of a honeybee. And those babies then go into a pouch on the mom's belly, and they stay on the pouch for about 3 months. After those 3 months, then they move and hang on to the mom's back. And they stay there for a couple of weeks, and only after those 2 weeks do they start to walk or move on their own. I think it's really cute, the noises that they make. So if baby possums when they start to wander off, if they get lost from their mom, the baby possums actually make little cute sneezy noises, and that's how the mom is able to locate the babies, is through those sneezing noises. Now, I mentioned his feet, so let's take a closer look. We look at the feet. This one is the back foot, and this one is the front foot. So it almost looks like they have an opposable thumb. I think it's called a hallux, though. And these feet will help them to climb up in the trees and away from other predators. And they also do have little tiny claws, but they almost just kind of look like a cat. If you have a cat, their claws. Another thing that will help them climb up in the trees is their tail. You may have noticed that the tail has less fur than the rest of the body, but there still is a little bit of fur on it, and you may not be able to see that, but it's a prehensile tail. This tail helps them, it's almost like a fifth limb, and it will help them support themselves, and as a young possum, it will actually support their entire body weight, but as an adult, they're actually too heavy. So it only partially supports their body weight of an adult. But whenever they're juvenile and young, possums will use their tail, and they might hang upside down in the tree branches from their tails. And if you see a possum doing that, you know that it's a young one because it's light enough to be held up entirely by its tail. Now, I mentioned his cute little nose. So let's go back and look at his skull. This is the skull of a possum. So if we look at it this way, we can see his nose. His eyes would be right in here, right here and here. These would be almost like cheekbones. And then his brain would be back there. Now, let's take a look at the teeth. I'll hold it up a little bit. So we do see some sharp canines, but we also see some teeth right in here. If I can focus it a little better. These teeth are not quite flat. They actually have little like cusps that come down. So do you think, looking at these teeth, do you think that our possum is a carnivore, a meat eater, an omnivore, an animal that eats plants and meat, or do you think that it is an herbivore, a plant eater? Our possum is an omnivore. So they have about 50 teeth within their mouth, and they are going to use these canines if they're eating meat to pull the meat off the bones. And then they're going to use these back teeth in order to chew those berries, nuts, and other plant matter that they're eating. So they're omnivores. And they might even eat dead and decaying things, so we might be able to call them a scavenger as well. Possums, they've adapted really well to our urban or city life because they are nocturnal, which means, again, they're awake at night. And because they'll eat just about anything. So they'll eat little amphibians, little insects, maybe things like mice or small animals. And so they've really adapted well, and they'll even eat humans' trash. So they've adapted really well to our city life. Their long nose right here, I mentioned that cute little pink nose that they have. They have a great sense of smell, and they will use that sense of smell to help them find and locate their food. Now, you also may have noticed that he's furry, and a lot of the animals that I've mentioned, well, the owl and the frog and the toad all kind of camouflaged with their environment. Do you think that our possum would be great at camouflaging in their environment? I'm not quite convinced they would be super great at camouflage. It really depends on what they're blending in with. I guess it's possible. But can you think of any other ways a possum might protect themselves? And this is a behavior. It's something that they do. Possums actually play dead. So you've never heard that saying of playing possum. It comes from these guys. And what happens is it's an involuntary response, meaning they cannot control it. It just happens whenever they feel extremely threatened. Their body just immediately reacts. And what happens is they slow their breathing rate and they slow their heart rate. And so it appears that they're dead. And they're hoping that the predator, whoever is after them, might not be interested in something that's already dead. And that once that threat has passed, they're able to get up and walk away from the experience. Some of those predators might be coyotes, bobcats. If they're small possums, even birds of prey like owls and hawks can also seek out some smaller possums. So they play dead, and that is a behavior. It's an action. It's something that they do that hopefully will help them to survive. Okay, Ms. Jessica, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more animal before questions?
We definitely do. I'm excited for this one.
Okay, so our last animal is a snake. This is a Western Diamondback rattlesnake. So what observations can you make about our snake? Keeping in mind where they live, what you think they might eat, or what you already know. When I look at the rattlesnake, the first thing I notice is its posture and how it's standing up like this, but also those sharp fangs. I notice the color of the rattlesnake and the pattern that it has down its body. And then, of course, I notice the rattle on the tail. So let's talk about how all of this comes together to help the rattlesnake survive. What do you think a snake eats? Do you think it is a carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore? Snakes are carnivores. They might eat things like small mice or rodents, maybe even a frog or a little lizard. And what they're going to do is they're going to swallow their prey whole. And there's a couple of adaptations that snakes have for this. So let's look at the skull of our rattlesnake. Our rattlesnake has fangs. Now, this skull has a few extra fangs on it because fangs can fall out and be replaced over time. So there's a couple of extra back here. But if we look at the shape of these teeth, do you notice anything special about them? I noticed that they're curved. They kind of have this almost like a curved shape to them. And that's good for a couple of things. One, these big fangs are retractable, so they need to be able to go back up and come out. So that might help them to have that curved shape. And then the other thing is Snakes don't have any limbs, like they don't have hands to hold their food into their mouth. So if they're going to swallow their prey whole, if their prey is still alive, it might wiggle around in their mouth and try to wiggle out. And if it tries to wiggle out, what's going to happen with these curved teeth is that it's going to get stuck on that curve. And so it will get stuck inside the mouth instead of being able to escape. That's why these teeth are curved. And if we look at a non-venomous snake, so the venom is in the fangs, but if we look at a non-venomous snake, we can see that they also have curved teeth that allow them to do the same thing. The other thing, another adaptation they have for eating their prey whole is that at the back, their jaws are really loosely attached. And that means that they can open their mouth really wide in order to swallow that prey whole. And even down here, loosely attached together. I mentioned that this snake is venomous, and they'll use that venom to help protect themselves. And that's not the only way that they protect themselves. If we look at the pattern of our snake, this pattern is going to help him blend in with the rocky terrain and the shade between the rocks as well. So he's going to camouflage extremely well in the environment that they live in. Now, they do have venom within these fangs, and that venom will be used if they have to use it to protect themselves. Or some snakes might use it to hunt their prey, and they might bite, say a little mouse, they might bite a mouse and then let the mouse go. And that mouse will then scurry away, and while the venom is taking over in their body, and eventually that venom will kill something as small as a tiny mouse, that snake will use its tongue, that forked tongue. It uses it to smell the environment around it and bring it in and out of its mouth, and it hits the Jacobson's organ. And what they do is then they can track the mouse and then eat the prey. So they may use it in that sense as well. Rattlesnakes also have a behavioral adaptation that they can use, and it is this rattle at the back. This is on the tip of their tail. So I want to talk about what it's composed of first. It's made out of keratin, which is kind of like the same thing as our fingernails. But what happens is snakes shed their skin, and humans, we shed our skin too, but we don't do it all at one time. Snakes will shed their scales and their skin from head to tail all at one time. And they even shed the skin over their eyelids, which I think is super cool. We can look at, this is the top of the snake and the bottom. So we can see the difference between the belly scales and the top scales. Those belly scales are gonna, a wave-like motion is gonna pass from the head all the way to the tail, and it's gonna push off, these scales are gonna push off the irregular surfaces of the ground, and that's what's gonna propel them forward. But rattlesnakes, this is not from a rattlesnake. A rattlesnake shed, the very last little tip of their tail is actually not shed, and it turns into the rattle. And over time, they'll collect more and more of these, but some of them will also fall off on the ends. And what they do with this rattle is they shake it, and it makes a noise. And they can shake it up to 60 times per second. It's gonna be pretty loud. And it's actually pretty helpful for us humans. If we are out and we hear that rattle, we know that there's a rattlesnake nearby. And basically the snake is trying to say, excuse me, I camouflage really well and you may not be able to see me, but I'm here. I really hope you hear me. Please do not invade my personal bubble. I already feel threatened. So snakes are not offensive animals. They're not seeking out things to bite. What happens is they feel threatened. And whenever they feel threatened, they take up this posture that my snake has and they rattle their tail. And again, as humans, we should hopefully hear the rattle, pause for a second, try to locate which direction it's coming from, and then calmly head the opposite direction. The last thing you want to do is panic and run into the rattlesnake. So remember to just take a beat, calm down, take a second, and listen, and then move on to the in the correct direction. One more thing I want to mention really quick. We'll come back to my large screen right here. Is the difference between venom and poison. So we said that snakes are venomous, but I mentioned earlier that toads are poisonous. And they're both, poison and venom are both toxic, and they can be harmful to humans and other animals, but it's all of, the difference is how it gets introduced into the body. So a poison, like from a toad or poison ivy, is something that you touch or something that you ingest. So I think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White is cursed by a poison apple from the evil queen, but the curse doesn't take effect until she eats the apple. So poison is something you eat or something you touch. Venom is something that is injected into the body. So those fangs puncture the body, and that's where the venom comes in. So it's all about how the poison or how the toxin is introduced into our body. That's the difference. And then, oh, I think one more question I want to cover, because I know someone probably has this question, is what about snakes? Do they have bones? And so I want to switch the view really quick. And I think this will be the last thing, and then we'll do questions. Is that yes, snakes do have bones. They have a skeleton with a backbone, just like ours, except it goes all the way down their body. And these little curvy bones that you see coming out of it, those are ribs, and those like our ribs. And they go all the way down almost to the very end of the body, and it helps protect the sides of their body. Miss Jessica, do we have any questions?
We do. We have some great questions. And I want to make sure you have time to get your snake questions in. So let's go back to the beginning to the owl. So Emiliano and Jalorian, and I really wish I could meet you guys to double check I'm saying everyone's name right. So hopefully I do okay. But they have similar questions. Why are the owls' heads tiny, and why are the owls' eyes big?
So the skull of the owl is pretty tiny because, again, they need to be lightweight. So those bones are, they're designed to be efficient with how small it is. But the rest of the head is covered by feathers, so it looks much larger. And if we took out a human skull and looked at the skull in comparison to the size of my head might look bigger now because you see all of the muscles and skin and organs inside of it. Now, owls' eyes are really large because they're nocturnal. Those large eyes allow extra light to come into their eyes so that way they have the best possible night vision. That's why their eyes are so large. It helps them to hunt at night.
Okay, and we have one more about the owl. Raleigh wants to know, does the owl's skin help it survive like a bear and other animals?
Does its skin help it survive? So the feathers are light enough that it keeps them warm, but also helps them to be able to fly. And the color of them will also help them camouflage with different environments. So they're hoping that this color pattern will help break up the tree and the owl, and they will blend in together. But it will also help them stay warm and to fly away if they need to escape from anything. I hope that answers your question. I'm not really sure if it did. Hopefully it does.
Okay, moving on to our frog and also our toad, because Lila and Draylin want to know, are frogs and toads the same thing, or are they different? And are frogs bigger than toads?
Frogs and toads are the same but different. So frogs and toads are both amphibians, which means they spend part of their life in water and part of their life out of water. They also have this smooth, moist skin. And whenever they lay their eggs, they have to be either in water or really close to a water source, and they're kind of like jelly-like. So those are some similarities between them. They're different in a couple of things. And let me change this view really quick. It's much easier to see over here. If you look at the shape of their bodies, so the frog here has a really pointed nose. The toad's is more rounded. We can also see the body shape. The frog looks more lean and athletic, whereas the toad looks kind of, he's not quite as lean, if you can see on the outsides. He holds on to a little bit more fat. And then the other thing you can really clearly notice is that most frogs have a really smooth skin, whereas most toads have this bumpy skin on the outside. But that's not true of all toads or all frogs. Some frogs do have bumpy skin and some toads do have smooth skin. But for the most part, toads have bumpy skin. So they're similar, but different.
And then one more about the frog. Juliet was also wondering about why they're different sizes, but also, is there anything else they can do to protect themselves from a predator?
So frogs can come in all kinds of sizes. This is just the largest one in North America. So they can be much smaller. They can be different colors to blend in with different environments. And you even have some frogs that are poisonous. And those are the really brightly colored ones. They're blue and yellow and sometimes orange. And they secrete poison from their skin. So that's one way that some frogs can protect themselves, but not every frog is poisonous. So bullfrog is not poisonous. They just try to camouflage and then jump away.
Okay, we have a couple questions about our possum. Isaiah and Adam both are curious about the babies, which sound just so cute. They want to know, do possums have good ears to hear their babies? And how do the babies eat when they're in the pouch?
Yes, so I do think they have a pretty good sense of hearing to be able to hear the babies. I don't know how great it is in comparison to any of our other animals. I don't know where that would rank on like a scale or anything, but I do think it would be pretty good. As for the babies, whenever they're in the pouch, the mom has glands that the babies can latch onto, and it's kind of like drinking milk.
Okay, that's all I saw for possum. For the snake, early on, Christian asked about what makes the rattle happen, but you already answered that one. But Yoreli wants to know, how does the snake stand up?
So underneath all these scales, they have lots of muscles attached throughout their body, and that will help them to stand up. So they do have muscles attached to all of those bones.
And those are the only snake questions we got. So I'm sure some of you at home have your own questions, and we definitely encourage you to keep being curious and asking questions and looking up the answers, because there's so much to learn about all the really cool animals out there. And even scientists themselves are still learning things. All right, well, that's all of the time we have. It was really cool to hear your observations and your questions. And thank you, Kristen, for showing us all these awesome animals.
Of course, I'm so happy to do it. I really hope you guys learned something today about structural and behavioral adaptations and how they all come together to help an animal survive in its habitat. If there were questions I didn't answer or couldn't answer, again, please look them up. You will learn so many cool things about these animals, and you'll walk away loving them, and they will all be your favorites, just like Miss Jessica and I. Bye.